Okay, we're going this afternoon onto our fourth sign, evangelization, and our four wheels, the apostolate. If you remember at the beginning of our reflection on Matthew Kelly's book, he said evangelization is usually the hardest one for people. In order they can do prayer, they can look at their time for study, they can look at how they can be generous, but then how do you evangelize and how do you present the teachings of the church, how do you present the faith, always becomes a little bit of a challenge for them. He says we're looking at evangelization and changing the world, and he says when we change the world, it's basically an inside-out job. He says oftentimes when we talk about changing the world, we're going to change somebody else. We're going to change something that's out there, when he says really the challenge is to change what's going on inside of us. He says when God looks to change the world, he looks within us, driving us to the heart of the matter, human behavior. How do we respond to God? How do we make changes? How do we witness? He says there are 7 billion people on the planet at the time the book was written. If your life were multiplied by 7 billion, what would the world be like? So if everybody was like us, not us, but they were like us, what would the world be like?
Boring.
Boring. So if we are changing what's happening inside of us, then that's how you're going to be changing the world. And oftentimes what we're going to do is what people are going to see or people are going to experience. Now sometimes we might, because of decisions we make, positions we take, where we are, we might be able to affect different things, but basically we're changing what's going on inside. He says our lives genuinely improve only when we become better people today than we were yesterday. And as he says, a better version of ourselves. So we want to keep improving upon that. So it is this change that we want to do that's going to help change the world. He says in the Old Testament, God offered the Israelites a fresh start based on a new way of living. He gave them the 10 Commandments because they were experiencing their own doubts and questions. So when they brought them out of Egypt, he was going to change them, bring them a new way of living, a new way they were acting. So they gave them the 10 Commandments. And then based upon the 10 Commandments, then you have the other books like Leviticus, Deuteronomy, whatever, that helps flesh out how those are to be lived in everyday activities. He says, in the great majority of cases, wherever you find injustice and misery in the world, you find that at least one of the 10 Commandments has been broken. So if you look at all the issues that are going on. He says, think for a moment on all the suffering that is caused because humanity has been unwilling to adopt a pattern of behavior and a social structure that celebrates the wisdom of the 10 Commandments. If we use that as a basis. He says sometimes we convince ourselves that the state of the world is someone else's fault, and therefore it is someone else's responsibility to fix it. The truth is we are all changing the world by what we say, what we do, how we respond. Every word and thought and action changes the world in ways that echo throughout the world, touching people and places we will never ever meet for changes to come. One of the things I used to tell our guys when I was a formation director, I says, you may not have the title of formation director, but you are forming these young men that are coming in our midst. For good or for bad. And so the challenge always given to us is to have a formation house of people that are giving good witness. Easier said than done because of the apostolate that's oftentimes a part. And sometimes we used to separate out whether it's a formative house or was it an apostolic house. If it was a formative house, you might have more junior professors. Maybe they're going to college. They're all going to school. And so the makeup of the house is very limited in its apostolate because the focus is on, 90% of the members are going to be gone all day. And so you just have a few, and then when they come back, you're going to participate. So you have to make sure that when they come back that you have the prayer time, you have the study time, you give a witness to community, you're focusing on whatever that structure is for in there. But it's merged over the years, so you might have one or two that are going out for studies or in the formative process, and as opposed to a whole group. So it depends upon how things are going. But we can change the whole world because of what we are affecting. So our way of responding, our prayer time, our witness, and it may be a quiet witness, it may not be out there that everybody sees, but they're going to see, may change the way we approach. If we are generous, if we are smiling, if we look at peaceful ways of bringing, we might be able to change the people that we are working with. Again, talking about the other day, the energy happened with actors in a play. You can come in and you can bring in the energy and raise everybody up, or you can come in and everybody else's negative energy or down energy is going to bring you down. The next thing you know, you've fallen into the same routine. And so the changes happen. It also realizes in any community, as soon as you change one person, you've changed the dynamics of the community. First of all, if you've lost someone because they have died, then their presence will mean a loss. If you're changing people, and so right now we're in a great deal of flux and a lot of angers and frustrations because some people are where they don't want to be. And so therefore, how they deal with that and how they work through and allow that time for the frustration to happen. Because a lot of people I've discovered over the years, when they don't want to go, when they get to the new place, they found out it's not as bad as they thought. Next thing you know, when the time comes, say, okay, we've evaluated for 3 years. What do you think? Yeah, I like this place. I'll stay, because they change it. But every time you change, it adapts. So where we're doing and how we respond in evangelization and our apostle and our ministry and our witness will change the world. He says, changing the world is part of our mission. It is also important to know that when we have failed, it has always been because we did not live our Catholic faith authentically. So if we live out our faith, then we will be faithful in our mission. And he says, how often do we walk into the church and say, wow, this is a group of people focused on changing the world? I don't know. Because that's what they should be. If they're getting their faith, if they're living that faith, they're coming together to be energized. They're coming together to be graced. They are there to support and encourage one another so that when we all leave the church, we're going out and evangelizing, witnesses, giving support, and then we come back the next week and get re-energized again. And so sometimes we look and say, people will think it's us professionals. And for many people, we are the professionals, the consecrated persons. It's your job to evangelize. It's not my job to evangelize. Well, we're all called to evangelize. So he says, are we doing mission or are we doing maintenance? He says, this is the question that our times are laying at the feet of the Catholic Church. Are we going out? Are we evangelizing? Are we sharing the gospel message? Proud to be a Catholic? Or are we just maintaining our own faith and our own worship and the ways we are doing? So he says there are 77 million Catholics in the United States today. He says those who oppose the Catholic worldview are afraid of how much influence we would have if we ever did get our act together. If we were all looking and approaching the same way, the 77 million, we could really affect changes that are happening in our society. But we're all over the place within our Catholic Church. So he says the first thing we need to do is focus on becoming men and women of virtue and character, and then leading others to the same. So first he talks about the best way to live. He says, first of all, we are here to become the best version of ourselves, his classic line. He says at some basic level, God has created us and put us here on earth as ourselves. We are unique. Everything makes sense in relation to the first principle. God has created us. We're trying to be the best version of ourselves. So as our awareness grows of what God has called us to do, so again, we're going back to those other four dynamics. Time for prayer, time for study, time for the generosity. It says as we grow, we become more mindful that we are constantly making choices that help us to become better versions of ourselves, or a lesser version of ourselves. It is by knowing, loving, and serving God and neighbor that we become all that God has created us to be. So we need to reflect upon that. The second principle, he says, we will discover that it is not as different from person to person as we might think. The ultimate organizing principle is how we live out the virtue. Our words and actions have real consequences in the lives of other people. So if we are living out those virtues, living a virtuous life, it's going to change the people all around us. And oftentimes we can see it, especially with family first, and some friends that we have, especially if they know our background and who we are as consecrated persons. And then, depending upon how faithful they are, how spiritual or religious they may be, we can affect their lives. He says, everything we say, do, or think affects other people. Virtue is the ultimate organizing principle. So when we make decisions, it's not affecting just us. It affects other people. There was a movie out called The Butterfly Principle. I don't know if any of you saw it. The basic butterfly principle is that if a butterfly flaps its wings in Canada, it affects the weather conditions like somewhere in South America or something like that. And so it starred Kushner, Anton, what his name is, Kushner, anyway. And things were happening in his life, and so he had the ability to change. But as he changed things in his own life, then he woke up like in a different reality. So he was trying to save his girlfriend from being killed. So he did something, but by doing that, he changed something else. And then he tried to change that, and it happened something else. And then he tried to change that, and it had a consequence. And so all these consequences of how he related with his friends and his family, but he had a capability or something because of his writing to able to change things. So I think the movie is called The Butterfly Effect, with Ashton Kutcher or whatever.
It's Ashton Kutcher, yes.
And so, you know, finally he was able to come back to like the very beginning and, you know, realize. And of course he knew what was going on, but people around him didn't know what was going on. But it was basically telling us that what we say and do can affect the lives of other people. So he says it can affect them whether it's a person's life, a marriage, or even the life of a nation. And so in virtue, we have another example of how the best way to live is the same for all of us. We all need to live virtuous lives. And how we are living is going to affect the people that we encounter. The third principle of the best way to live is self-control. He says we try to control the gratification that we like to have in our lives. We want to feel good. We want to have the best for us. And so sometimes we need to have control over the decisions that we make, which are going to delay that gratification. He says, and this may change from person to person. And it also changes for us as we go through our life. Where are we on our journey? It affects us if we are single or married persons. It affects us whether we're making a decision when we're 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 or whatever. Because where we are, we're making these decisions that are changing. So we have to determine what is the best way that we can serve generously and to give of ourselves to others. So he says this is a dynamic question of where is that control, that we look at living the virtuous life, living out that gratification that we desire. It requires a little bit of our intention every day on how we're living. He quotes Matthew 22. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's one of the famous quotes for all of us in the Pauline family, because mind, heart, and will lines up with the way, truth, and life. It lines up with about 16 other different versions of 3 triominoes. The infamous 1 + 1 equals
1.
There you go. Very good. You're all good. Holy family members, they didn't get that when I asked them. Of course, then by that time we had a lot of changeover, probably in those years. And I said, remember, 1 + 1 equals 2. No. That's a nice thing to pay attention. But not everybody there had heard my talk, but it was basically the triangles. So it was like God and man equals Jesus, so 1 + 1 equals 1, and we had triangles linked together and all this type of stuff. So anyway, the life of the church and her teachings are an extension of the gospel that we too try to live the best way we can live by following the gospel message. So each of us gets to decide if we are going to walk the path or we're not going to walk the path. And so evangelization is helping people to understand how they can discover God in their own life and to be the best version of themselves. We help people to discover this best way of life. We get them in touch with God, awareness of where they are. We help them to make the decisions on virtue. We help them to determine self-control, looking after God and looking after neighbor. He says evangelization is the ultimate form of love of neighbor. He says relativism leads to a world where nobody is the best version of themselves. It's all relative. Doesn't matter. We can make the decisions on our own. So he throws out the question, were Mother Teresa's approach to life and Hitler's approach to life equal? Hitler and Mother Teresa. They both had an approach to life. It's all relative. It doesn't matter because all of them are good. So we ask the question, are Mother Teresa's approach to life and Hitler's approach to life equal? Most of us would say no, obviously. But that's what relativism is. He says relativism is the enemy of evangelization because if all ways of living are equal, then there is no need for us to lead others to a better life. They already got it. So why do I evangelize? Why do I tell them about our relationship with God? Why am I generous and looking after the poor? Why am I walking with people and asking them to have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ? So he offers an approach called win, W-I-N, build, and send. He said God wants to win us over with his love and wisdom. He wants us to build up spiritually so that we have the knowledge and the habits to live his love and to walk in his way, and then he wants us to send us out into the world in order to draw others to him. So we look first at how God wins us. We are all called to live holy lives. There were certain ways to think, speak, and behave that causes us to grow in goodness, virtue, and holiness. So we can just reflect upon our journey that we had. There were certain things that moved us in the direction of being holy people, virtuous people, living in a relationship with the Lord. And then there were other ways that we learned that think, and speak, and cause us to behave differently. The challenges that are given to us. And so he says God does not win us just once. He wins us over and over again in newer ways and deeper ways. So the question becomes, do we allow Jesus to win us in new ways? He says if we allow him to win us each year more and more, then we are having spiritual progress. And he says, and that's a beautiful thing, because we're growing deep. So as we on our Pauline spiritual journey, we will learn more and more about our Pauline spirituality. We'll learn more about way, truth, and life. We'll learn more about Queen of Apostles. We'll learn more about St. Paul. We'll learn more about our apostolate. And as we grow and deeper, that's going to enable us to evangelize, enable us, help us able to grow. He says there are three ways people are won: through truth, through beauty, and through goodness. We have a truth that finally clicks for us, and we have an understanding of what that truth is all about. We see beauty that God has given us in the creation and in others, and we begin to see the goodness in others. And so we begin to see where God is speaking to us, and he wins us over in those many ways. He says 89% of dynamic Catholics describe a conversion experience, an event in their life that won them to a more engaged relationship with God. Something happened that clued it all in. He says some got it by going on a retreat and heard something that inspired them, or took the time to be with the Lord, or walked with the Lord. Some went on a pilgrimage. Others went to a conference. Others got it by reading a book, or listening to a CD. Or others when they experienced a life-altering event, such as someone who was dying, or someone who died, or perhaps a potential fatal illness that they have to endure, that they begin to see where the Lord is walking in their life. The way they think, the way they speak, and the way they lived is now markedly differently from the rest of the Catholics because of this conversion experience that has happened in their lives. He says as people journey through the church, he says they need to make a choice if they're going to follow Christ and if they're going to follow the church. So even though a person maybe have been baptized as an infant, is no guarantee that they're going to stay in the church and stay on that spiritual journey. So there's constantly that we need to win them over. He says most people just drift away from the church, and we never help them to form an effective relationship with Jesus and his church. So the church needs to find ways we can help in that respects, of letting people know that Jesus loves them, Jesus is a part of their life, and how important the Catholic faith is. He says some never got that support, and if they had, perhaps they would have never left. So he says we need to spend a lot of time and energy working on how we are going to win people, and if we are going to breathe new life in the Catholic Church today. How are we going to participate? How God wins us over, to show them that God can win them over, or how can we win them over for God? Then he moves on to the section of building. He says, dynamic Catholics have built a spiritual life. They can pray anywhere. They can stop by a church even for 10 minutes each day for a week. And they find their lives different. So if we would challenge people to do that, just stop in your church on your way to work or when you come home, just go in for 10 minutes, offer a little prayer, and see if your world has changed. I usually tell people, pray every day, because I know it works. I guarantee it works. So he says he had his own spiritual director. It says the spiritual director said, start reading the Gospels for 15 minutes each day. That's what he started with. Then he suggested that I attend weekday Mass once each week. Then he suggested that the two of them go on a Saturday afternoon to a nursing home and visit the residents that were there. He says later he suggested that I go to confession. And then he asked if I would like to pray the rosary. And then he gave me a spiritual book to read. He said I had questions about life, and he developed a way to discover those answers to those questions. He says, in the process, Matthew Kelly says, I came to one of my most strongly held convictions about our faith. People deserve answers to their questions. So they question about the faith, questions about the journey. We can be there because we've journeyed. We're part of the church. We're evangelizing. We can tell them it works. Invite them to come with us. He says, my spiritual director, my spiritual coach, was intentionally sharing the faith with me and trying to lead me to a better life. He says we need process, we need intentionality. He says we need a plan. So if we're going to evangelize, we need to know, what are we going to do? What are those steps? What are those options that we're going to do as part of our life? So maybe we can reflect upon what we're doing in our lives to evangelize others. Then he moves to the send. He says friendship is the most natural and effective way to share the faith with others. He says Christian friendship is not just about common things that we have, common interest, but he says we're trying to get them to be a little bit better for themselves. So he says one of the first things of evangelization is we do it through friendship. So again, family, friends, people that we encounter are the ones that we're going to evangelize. He says the second key to evangelization is generosity, love, and compassion. So we're generous with our time, generous with sharing, have a love for other people, have compassion for them, walk with them on their journey. He says the third key is helping people find answers to their questions. Where is God in my life? We were talking a little bit after we finished the other day. You know, people encounter something devastating in their life. Where is God in all of this? Where is He a part of this devastation? So people are always asking questions. Catholics have questions, non-Catholics have questions. He quoted Fulton Sheen. There are only 100 people in the world who disagree with what the church teaches. The rest disagree with what they think the church teaches, because they don't have the answers. They don't know what our teaching is all about. So again, the more we can learn about our catechism, the more we can learn about our faith, and the more we can share it. And in some cases able to have an answer for them, or as we said earlier, if we don't, we know where to go find the answer. And then we can come back and give them an answer. We are all being called to share our faith with others. We are here to share the beauty and the goodness and the friendship. And we are here to answer people's deepest questions. we are able to invite people to discover God in their life. Now he says most Catholics don't evangelize because they don't actually believe that Catholicism is a superior way of life. So until we are one, we don't have the passion, the fire in our belly, he says, to attract anyone else. And Christianity only genuinely grows through attraction. I said in a homily one time, what if we are the only Catholic that somebody knows? What would be their thoughts on the Catholic faith? Are we witnessing? Do we have the answers? Do we know how we're living our faith? He says we need a process for training Catholics to become really good at sharing the genius of Catholicism with others. We need to encourage others to evangelize, and call others to not be afraid to go out and speak about what's happening in their life. So as he says, we have the win, build, and send phases. He says during the first two of win and build, he says one of the things that happens to people is that they start to feel good about being Catholic. They've discovered God. They start going on retreats. Maybe they have Advent, Lent, summer programs offered by the church. They begin to see where the Lord is in their life. They begin to read about, and they begin to build. Reading more, praying more, journeying more. He says, highly regarded Catholics feel good about being Catholic, and they are inspired Catholics. He says, in every place and time, there is no shortage of reasons to feel really good about being Catholic. And this is our social and spiritual contributions, the life we bring to the communities in which we live, the support we provide physically, emotionally, and intellectually, and spiritually to people all around the world. Prayer and support. He says dynamic Catholics feel good about being Catholic. And they feel this way regardless of what is happening in their parish. It doesn't matter what the latest church scandal is. And it doesn't matter how Catholicism has been distorted or abused. Catholicism is bigger than all of this for them. They can work their way through. He says, even among these dynamic Catholics, evangelization is the weakest link. He says, even though evangelization is a core behavior, one of the 4 signs of being a dynamic Pauline or being a dynamic Catholic, he says, oftentimes dynamic Catholics tend to do it in a more passive way than one might expect. They're not out there on the soapbox preaching. It's more subtle, more passive, more quiet. He says the first 3 signs that we've looked at: prayer, study, generosity, help build up the 4th. He said evangelization is to the church what breathing is to a person. It should be part of who we are. If we stop doing it for long enough, we will die. It is our mission to evangelize. So he says, what do we do? Some of the things we can do, we can pass books, CDs, DVDs around. Listen to it, share it, give it to others. Invite people to come to Catholic events. Bring a godly perspective to conversations. Give different viewpoints. He says, learn the Catholic teachings on certain issues and be able to articulate them when the church is attacked over those issues in social settings. We need to help people discover answer to their questions that cause them to doubt the Catholic faith. And we need to demonstrate the love of God through faithful and generous friendship. So he asks us to do just one thing every week. That'll be part of our evangelization. He says, if every member of our parishes did one thing each week to share the faith with others, how different would our parish be a year from now? He says, when Catholicism is lived enthusiastically and generously, it is incredibly attractive, and in this way our lives become contagious. So I'm going to stop there, and then we will conclude tomorrow in looking at our apostolate from a few different perspectives that our founder has given us. And then hopefully that will inspire us then to be the best dynamic Pauline